Howdy day. Norfolk. And today I thought I would use this rather unpromising implement, the Humble Biro, because drawing with a biro is surprisingly enjoyable. Much beloved of doodlers in business meetings, making little geometric shapes and squiggles as you endure long interminable meetings, which I suppose in the current situation there will be fewer of, and everyone will be conducting them on Zoom platforms. But as long as you've got a little bit of paper next to you, you can always just doodle. And the biro is great for all sorts of reasons. You know, it's unpromising in some ways, but on the right bit of paper, with a nice texture to it, it's very durable. And what I particularly like about the Humble Biro, I will be calling it the Humble Biro quite often, I think, in this segment. I've got to remember to try and focus on the drawing itself rather than my fingers. Nobody wants to look at my fingers in close-up. Is that the biro is very stable. It doesn't smudge. It sort of dries almost instantly. The ink is this sort of gel-like ink, but it's not ever sort of wet. So, you know, in technological terms, it's very trusty. It's a little bit like a certain type of hard pencil, you know. And of course, the other thing about the biro is that it's indelible. And that, as we shall see in a moment, is a wonderful property. So also I enjoy the notion of drawing with a very simple tool like this. And seeing what sort of intricacy one can put into a drawing. So again, I've just started this with no real thought about where it's going, but this, I think, is one of my, I'd like to think of them as story starter drawings, where you start off with something fairly innocuous, maybe a plait of hair, and you start to add the robes, and now a sort of goblet in the hand. And start to build the idea of a picture, and at this point I'm going to add the frame. And so one builds what I like to think of as a story starter, an image that starts to reveal itself as you go, and in the actual act of drawing, one can begin to tell yourself at first a little story, as you draw, so a possibility of a narrative can form, where you can start to go, right, now, who is this person? They appear to be standing at the doorway somewhere, and there is a goblet in this person's hand, so maybe this is some sort of hall of some sort. Maybe there's some feasting going on inside. There is maybe it's the start of some sort of fantasy tale or fairy tale, or one of those sort of narratives where a world is being built up. Or maybe it's none of those things. That's the other thing. You can, as you draw, you can sort of tell yourself stories and then double back on yourself and go, no, I don't think it's about that at all. It might be about something else. And I always allow myself to just daydream, essentially, as I'm drawing and creating something. Just allow myself to daydream. Let's do a little bit of runic carving in the lintel. And I just daydream about, what it is I'm drawing, and then sometimes it's fun to add a title. Maybe sometimes a title gives a context, to an image. Maybe it's a reinforcing title, the cupbearer, or maybe it's an intriguing title. Maybe the beginning of a quest, the visitor, the late arrival at the feast. Anything can sort of start to give this story that's forming in your head some sort of context that you can build on and develop. And the other possibility is that it does nothing of the sort, and no narrative builds up. It just becomes what it is. It becomes a picture of some figure. And that's okay as well. It's like, it's so analogous with daydreaming that it needs no outcome unless you want to give yourself an outcome. And so much of this, as I do the drawing diary videos, what's coming home to me is that so much of what I do is speculative and then sort of builds to something else, and there's also a high percentage of things that don't go any further, that just remain as thoughts, ideas that are considered and then left dormant. And it's often quite fun to collaborate with a writer or a poet and actually give them a picture cue and say, can you write me a story on this? And writers often quite enjoy that challenge, where they're invited to work within the parameters of a visual image, and as a spark to their imagination. So it's nice. Can be a really nice way to work. And some of the most satisfying projects I've been involved with writers have been open-ended collaborations where I've been allowed. Certainly, I've just been on the phone to Paul Stewart, who's a writer that I've known for many years, and Paul and I have always worked in this collaborative way where I will provide images to give context to stories Paul is writing, and so we've had this very open-ended collaboration which has led to books like The Edge Chronicles and Far-Flung Adventures and Wormweald, and lots of sort of, adventures in publishing I've really valued over the years. He's been a great collaborator and friend. And very early on in our working relationship, I started to sort of gather, world building ideas into what I call the Black Book, and the Black Book became like the Bible for the Edge Chronicles. And if some notes went into the Black Book, it was as if within the world of the Edge, they were facts, and Paul would work with those facts, however inconvenient. And so that sort of pushed Paul into some sort of decision making that was really, really creative and unexpected within the sort of context of the books. And equally, I could nudge Paul in directions that I wanted to go in visually, and so we had this really nice sort of co-ownership of this imaginary world, and we would sort of lose ourselves in conversations about the geopolitical constructs within this entirely imaginary fantastical world. And what Paul was so good at was not sort of imbuing it with a mysticism. The Edge world is a sort of empirical and well regulated place in all sorts of ways, where story does not rule. There's a pragmatism to everything. Characters live, they die, they make decisions, but they almost never summon up supernatural powers that are there for sort of the convenience of the story. It's the other way around. The story follows the trials and tribulations of our characters, and we sort of grew to absolutely love the characters, and they still, when I go revisit the Edge, it sort of feels real to me somehow. So here, in Biro, is a figure standing in a doorway, and I was talking about the indelibility of the Biro. Well, we're going to test this now, just by adding some colour. I always find this a rather magical moment. Look at that, Biro doesn't smudge at all. I'm using my favourite colouring, which is a sort of blue wash. Whether it's pencil crayon or watercolour, it still sort of creates the desired effect. You can just let it sort of wash over the figure. Let's create the woodwork. And I'm trying to keep these videos reasonably short, just enough to get a sort of flavour of where drawings might go. And it's been a little sort of challenge to see how much I can sort of get done in a quarter of an hour. And I think sometimes, speculative drawings like this work best when they're time limited. You're not, but other times, it's an absolute pleasure just to spend hour after hour just embellishing a drawing and letting it really grow into what you want it to be. So hopefully this is an illustration that, let me just tidy that up a little bit. It's an illustration that's grown out of step-by-step decisions and turning into possibly an enigmatic illustration, the beginning of a saga, a fairy tale, an adventure of some sort.